Hey there. Tonight we drift far back, beyond the memory of mountains, beyond the traces of fossils, into a time when the Earth itself seemed half-formed and restless. Picture a world 3.5 billion years ago, a place that looked nothing like the one we know. The sun was dimmer, its warmth struggling to reach the surface. The sky was not blue but a haze of methane and sulfur, thick and strange, turning daylight into a copper twilight. Beneath it, oceans stretched across most of the planet, green and heavy with dissolved iron, steaming in places where fire erupted from the crust. This was the Archean, an age where life was only beginning to whisper, and the land itself shifted like a fever dream. The ground trembled constantly, reshaped by volcanoes that bled molten rock into the seas. Mountains rose and collapsed in silence, their existence fleeting. What we think of as continents were no more than fragile islands, drifting on a crust still young and unstable. Standing there, if one could, would feel like watching a stage being built while the play had already begun. Nothing was stable, nothing was safe. The air could not be breathed by us, thick with poison. And yet, against all expectation, it was in this alien world that life found its foothold. I imagine myself standing on black volcanic rock, steam rising from cracks, the sea hissing as waves struck the shore. The air burns the lungs, acrid with sulfur. Above, clouds churn endlessly, lit by constant lightning that splits the sky into flashes of white fire. The sun glows weakly behind the haze, too faint to warm but bright enough to cast an eerie amber light. It feels less like Earth, and more like a planet still dreaming itself into being. And yet, unseen beneath the waves, life had already begun its quiet labour. In shallow waters, tiny microbes clung together, forming thin mats that trapped sediments grain by grain. These simple colonies would someday leave layered fossils we call stromatolites, monuments of patience that endure even now. They looked like nothing, silent blisters on stone, but they were busy transforming everything. Each breath they took, each chemical they released, slowly shifted the balance of air and sea. They did not know it, but they were architects of futures beyond imagination. Their silence was not absence, but creation in its slowest form. What unsettles me most is how invisible it all must have been. If I had stood there, would I even notice them? Would I sense the beginning of a story that would one day lead to forests, animals, us? Or would it pass me by like dust on rock, unworthy of attention? Life then was fragile, almost silent, hidden in thin layers, yet it was writing the first lines of history. The paradox overwhelms me. In a world so hostile, life should not have survived. And yet, it was there, shaping the stage we would inherit. The thought leaves me restless. The Archean was not kind, not gentle. It was violent and unstable, a planet at war with itself. Seas boiled where volcanic vents erupted. The sky rumbled with endless storms. Asteroids still struck the surface with devastating force. By any measure, it was a world meant for destruction. And yet, somehow, in that chaos, life endured. It grew, layer by layer, film by fragile film, as if defying the very planet that sought to erase it. I close my eyes and picture that defiance. Waves stained green with iron, lightning cracking above, air unfit for breath. In the midst of it, the smallest of beings multiplied, blind to the storm, blind to the poison, but persistent. Their world was fire and shadow, but they claimed it grain by grain, cell by cell. It makes me wonder, was survival then an accident, or was it inevitable, written into the chemistry of the Earth itself? And as that question lingers, I realise the story has only just begun, because the real mystery is not that life existed in the Archean, but how that strange, hostile Earth transformed into a cradle of life at all. The thought echoes in my mind like distant thunder, drawing me deeper into a world that should not have allowed life, and yet somehow did. I picture the oceans again, thick with iron, green as oxidized metal, restless beneath volcanic skies. If survival seemed unlikely, transformation appeared impossible, and yet within these alien waters, chemistry itself became restless, improvising with forces we can barely comprehend. The atmosphere was suffocating by our measure, with barely a trace of oxygen, heavy instead with methane and carbon dioxide. To us it would be poison, but to microbes it was abundance, a banquet of energy waiting to be consumed. They were not victims of this world, but its heirs, thriving where nothing else could. The paradox unsettles me. What we call deadly, they called life. And it makes me wonder, is hostility only defined by us, by our limitations, rather than by what a world truly offers? Imagine standing on the edge of a shallow sea after a storm. The skies still churn with clouds, streaks of lightning flicker, but beneath the surface life teems invisibly. Sheets of microbial mats cover the rocks, silent carpets of cells weaving the first ecosystems. They do not move in ways we can see, but they alter the chemistry of the waters around them, transforming the invisible into consequence. Their patience defies the violence above them. They did not resist the storms, they endured them. What startled me most when I first tried to grasp this world was the sun. Scientists tell us it was weaker then, its light reduced by nearly a third compared to today. And yet the Earth did not freeze. Instead, the haze of greenhouse gases trapped heat, creating a paradox of dim skies above and warm oceans below. Without that delicate balance, liquid water might never have lasted, and without oceans there could have been no stage for life at all. Was that balance luck? Or does chance itself take on a different meaning when it plays across billions of years? The seas churned with invisible struggles. Some microbes fed on methane, others experimented with sulfur, and slowly, tentatively, a few began to harness sunlight. Not the grand photosynthesis of forests and flowers, but its first fragile version, a chemistry so bold it would alter the planet forever. These pioneers exhaled oxygen, not knowing it would become both poison and possibility. For now their breath dissolved into the seas, rusting the iron that filled them, laying down bands of stone that endure to this day. Each layer, red and grey, is a page in Earth's first diary, written not with words, but with breath. I find myself haunted by the thought that these microbes, blind and voiceless, were more powerful than any empire to come. Their exhalations reshaped oceans, turned skies, and prepared a world for futures they could never imagine. They were architects without intention, writing destinies without knowing they had begun. And I ask myself, do we, in our time, recognize the consequences of our own breath, our own exhalations into the sky? Or are we as blind as they were, changing the planet without ever seeing the scale of what we do? The Archean begins to feel less like ancient history and more like a mirror. I stand on that imagined shore, black rock beneath my feet, green tides curling at my ankles. I inhale air that burns my lungs, and yet life surrounds me in ways I cannot see. It is humbling to realise that what feels lifeless to me was alive with potential, that silence itself can carry the weight of beginnings. Perhaps the Archean is not only a story of how life endured, but of how easily we mistake absence for emptiness. This realisation deepens the unease, because if microbes thrived where we would die, then perhaps the question is not why life began here, but why it did not begin everywhere. If chemistry can improvise into existence on a planet so hostile, what other worlds, what other Archeans might be stirring even now across the universe? The thought sends a chill through me, because suddenly our story does not feel unique. It feels like one verse in a song sung far beyond Earth. The more I dwell on it, the clearer it becomes. The Archean Earth was not quiet, not dead. It was restless, alive in ways too subtle for eyes like ours. Every storm fed reactions, every vent seeded possibilities, every tide carried whispers of a future unseen. Life did not merely survive here, It conspired with the planet, reshaping it from within. And the question that follows is inescapable. If microbes could transform a world without knowing it, what transformations might we already be setting in motion without understanding their cost? The thought grows heavier, pressing against me with the weight of 3.5 billion years. The Archean was not a backdrop. It was a crucible, and everything that came after was forged in its fire and silence. To imagine it as scenery is to misunderstand it entirely. The Archean was not a stage on which life happened. It was the script, the actor, the stage, and the storm all at once. Every breath of its poisonous air, every strike of its lightning, every crack in its molten crust played a role in shaping what was to come. It was a world that both threatened life and paradoxically insisted that life exist within it. The paradox feels almost unbearable when I think of the microbes themselves. They had no awareness, no plan, no vision of the billions of years that would follow, and yet each small reaction within their fragile membrane has tipped the balance of oceans and skies. The gases they released, unnoticed at first, became the foundation of a transformation so vast it would eventually write the conditions for forests, for animals, for us. I cannot escape the haunting thought that intention may never have mattered at all. Perhaps survival, blind and persistent, is more powerful than any plan. Picture those green seas, rich in dissolved iron. Each wave carried invisible battles, chemical duels between microbes experimenting with different paths. Some consumed methane, others sulfur. Some began to use sunlight in ways that shifted the very chemistry of their world. Imagine watching it unfold without ever seeing it. An invisible war beneath the waves, silent yet decisive. This was not a quiet beginning. It was conflict at the smallest scale, a struggle that would ripple outward until the planet itself changed. And here lies the detail that unsettles me most. The sun was faint, almost failing, its light too weak to warm the planet fully. Yet greenhouse gases wrapped the Earth in a fragile cloak, balancing the equation just enough to keep the oceans liquid. It was a precarious balance, and one that could have easily failed. Without those gases, Earth would have frozen. With too many, it might have boiled. Instead, it hovered in between, unstable but survivable. Was it chance? Or was it inevitability, the kind of balance that happens when chaos tries every possibility until one works? The oceans themselves tell the story. As oxygen trickled into them, iron dissolved in the waters began to rust, falling to the seafloor in vast blankets of mineral that hardened into rock. These banded layers, red and grey, repeated endlessly, are still visible in cliffs today. They are tombstones as much as testaments, markers of a time when oxygen was not life, but death. For the microbes who thrived in methane and sulfur, oxygen was toxic. It spread slowly, invisibly, and with every breath of it more ancient lineages perished. What would it feel like to live in a world where the very air was turning against you, every tide a threat? The irony is sharp. What poisoned them became our lifeline. What destroyed their world built ours. I cannot look at oxygen the same way when I remember this. It was born as waste, as ruin for countless beings who thrived long before us. And yet, out of that ruin, the possibility of complex life emerged. Every forest, every heartbeat, every breath we take is an inheritance of catastrophe. It forces me to ask, is every gift the earth gives us written first as destruction for someone else? Standing on that imagined shore again, I feel the weight of this history pressing down. The air burns with sulfur, the tides are tinted green, the sky is dim. It feels alien, unwelcoming, impossible. And yet, it was home. Not to us, but to them, the silent architects who reshaped everything without knowing. Their patience outlasted fire, storm, and time itself. Their silence was not weakness, but resilience. A resilience that demanded the planet itself bend around it. And so the Archean reveals itself not as a distant memory, but as the first echo of a pattern that has never ended. Creation born through destruction, survival carved from fragility, transformation built from catastrophe. And the question that rises now is unavoidable. If their breath could alter the world beyond recognition, what unseen consequences are we exhaling into our own future? The thought lingers, unsettling in its simplicity, because it forces me to see the Archean not as something sealed in stone, but as a mirror of our present. Their breath was invisible, slow, and yet it remade the oceans and skies. Our breath too carries gases into the air, unseen but relentless. The microbes never knew what they were shaping. Do we? Or are we just as blind, convinced of permanence while laying the foundation for a world that may soon feel unrecognizable? The Archean tells me that transformation is rarely gentle. The rise of oxygen was not smooth progress, it was catastrophe. Entire lineages of life that had flourished for millions of years collapsed as oxygen spread through their seas. To them it was poison, a slow suffocation, turning their green waters into rust-red graveyards. The rocks remember this in layers of iron, stripes of stone that stretch across cliffs like silent epitaphs. These bands are not just geology, they are tombstones, the memory of death turned to mineral. And yet, from those deaths, a future was made. I picture it vividly, an ocean glowing red under a dim sun, a planet that looks wounded, bleeding iron into its depths, the air still heavy with methane, storms brewing endlessly, and beneath it all, survivors, microbes that could tolerate the poison, that could turn oxygen from toxin to tool. Their resilience was not only endurance, but innovation. In adapting to a changing world, they reshaped it again, turning catastrophe into opportunity. Out of destruction, the blueprint of the future was carved. It forces me to ask, is collapse always loss, or can it also be creation in disguise? When I think of my own life, of times when everything seemed to fall apart, I see the same paradox. Out of endings, new beginnings often rise, though rarely without pain. The Archean becomes personal then, a reminder that survival often means becoming something unrecognizable compared to what came before. Change demands sacrifice, and the cost is always higher than we imagine. And yet, there is something chilling in the silence of that transformation. No voices mourned those vanished lineages, no consciousness recorded their passing. The ocean shifted, the chemistry rewrote itself, and life went on, stripped of memory. It makes me wonder if memory itself is an accident, something late to arrive, and if meaning is only ever layered afterward, like our own words painted on stone. For the Archean, meaning did not exist. There was only consequence. But even consequence feels intentional when I imagine the scale of change. The sky, once dim and hazy, began to clear as oxygen grew. The oceans, once green and metallic, shifted to new shades. The very planet was altered, step by step, by the breath of microbes too small to see. And here lies the paradox that unsettles me most. The tiniest lives had the greatest power. They succeeded not through strength, not through vision, but through sheer persistence. What they did unknowingly echoes still in every breath we take. It makes me turn inward. If microbes could alter the earth through blind survival, then what do we alter through choice? We imagine ourselves masters of our environment, bending nature to our will, but the Archean whispers otherwise. It tells me that power often lies not in intention but in persistence, in the quiet repetition of actions that seem small until they shape the world itself. What then are we building now? Layer upon layer, blind to the consequences. The silence of those ancient seas haunts me. I see their waves glowing faintly with the iron, their depths bubbling with unseen chemistry, their shores lined with black volcanic rock. There were no forests, no animals, no sound beyond storm and fire, and yet it was not empty. It was alive in ways too subtle for eyes to grasp. its silence filled with labour that would define every age to come. The Archean teaches me that silence is not absence, but preparation. And so, the question sharpens. If their invisible breath could shift a planet, what transformations are we now rehearsing in our own silence? The weight of that thought presses harder than any stone, because it makes the distance of 3.5 billion years vanish. I look at the Archean not as a fossilised chapter, but as an unfinished mirror, one that still reflects us. The microbes exhaled blindly, never suspecting that their waste would become the air of forests, the sky of birds, the breath of human lungs. We too exhale gases, actions, choices, and perhaps, like them, we have no idea what world we are already shaping. To imagine this is to see the Archean as less of a beginning and more of a warning. Its silence tells us something we resist. Change is never optional. It is always happening, always accelerating, often in directions no one can predict. Those microbes did not choose to alter the chemistry of oceans. They only followed survival. And yet, through survival, they triggered extinction after extinction, wiping away lineages that had once thrived. What is survival for one age becomes catastrophe for another? I wonder, do we live in the same pattern, convinced of our permanence while setting into motion the collapse of what surrounds us? The rocks themselves tell the story. In cliffs across the world, banded iron formations gleam like scars. Red stripes mark oceans where oxygen poisoned ancient waters. Grey layers mark the pauses between floods of death. These are not just patterns of stone. They are memory, etched by chemistry, proof that the earth itself remembers loss even if no voice did. To stand before them is to stand before a graveyard so vast it covers continents. And yet, it is also to stand before the blueprint of life as we know it. Out of graves, futures were carved. Out of silence, new voices eventually rose. I imagine those oceans again, rusting as iron sank, entire worlds of microbes suffocating in their own creation. Imagine being one of them, if awareness had existed. The very breath you exhale becomes the tide that kills your kin. A paradox as cruel as it is inevitable. And yet, without it, nothing that followed, no animals, no forests, no humans, could ever have emerged. The Earth was not simply a home, it was an examiner, forcing life to adapt or die, demanding innovation through catastrophe. It was a crucible not once but always. And this realization opens another question. Was life's origin itself an accident of resilience? The Archean whispers of worlds erased, bombardments from asteroids, oceans boiled and cooled again, atmospheres rewritten by fire and poison. Each time the chance for life could have ended, and yet, each time, it endured. If chance had erased us once, there would be no memory, no record, no lament. It would simply be silence again, as though nothing had happened. How many beginnings were lost before one finally lasted? We cannot know, and the uncertainty is what unsettles me most. The Archean becomes less about beginnings then, and more about rehearsals. Each collapse, each extinction, each near erasure was not an ending but a trial, testing whether life could persist under conditions meant to destroy it. Persistence was the script. Silence was the stage. Out of that silence, eventually something more complex would rise. It was never guaranteed. It was never planned. It was only endured, and I cannot help but turn that lesson inward. If our breath now alters the sky, if our actions shift the chemistry of oceans, are we any different from those microbes? They could not know what their survival would cost others. We know, and yet, perhaps we do not stop. Are we repeating their story, rehearsing extinction not for ourselves but for others who may come after us? The thought leaves me unsteady. The Archean does not comfort. It reminds me that the world has always been unstable, that survival has always carried loss, and that permanence is an illusion. What feels eternal today is only a pause in a cycle of collapse and rebirth. Perhaps the greatest truth hidden in those ancient stones is that nothing we build lasts forever, and nothing we lose is truly the end. And so I return to the imagined shore, the green tide curling against volcanic rock, the sky dim and heavy with storm. I hear the silence, and in it I feel the weight of the question I cannot escape. If collapse was the foundation of their survival, is collapse also the foundation of ours? The question cuts like a fault line, splitting certainty into trembling uncertainty. To stand in the mind's eye on that ancient shore, with green tides foaming under a dim sun, is to feel that collapse was not a failure, but a rhythm, a pulse beating through the bones of Earth itself. Each collapse carved new paths, each destruction left behind the raw material for creation. It is almost as if the planet itself demanded life to be tested, forged again and again in fire and silence, until only the resilient remained. The Archean was relentless. Volcanoes rose from the sea and fell back into it, their brief peaks collapsing into the depths. Entire islands vanished under lava, then re-emerged, then vanished again. Nothing lasted, yet nothing truly ended either. Life adapted with each upheaval, spreading like whispers into every possible niche. Around deep-sea vents, where scalding water gushed from cracks in the earth, colonies of microbes thrived on minerals and heat alone. Where we would see only death, they saw sustenance, weaving existence from poison and darkness. Their world was never stable, yet it was endlessly abundant for those who could bend with its storms. And here the unsettling realization strikes me. Stability may not be the natural state of worlds. Perhaps instability is the only truth, and what we call stability is merely a pause between convulsions. The Archean whispers this lesson from its depths, and it unsettles me because it means our yearning for permanence may be against the grain of the cosmos itself. If life thrives in collapse, then what does that say about us, who fear it more than anything? The silence of the Archean was not empty. It was alive with lightning, with geysers of steam, with oceans glowing from chemical reactions invisible to eyes. The air hissed with methane and carbon dioxide, the ground shook constantly, and yet, in this chaos, patterns began to form. Tiny colonies of stromatolites rose in shallow waters, building layered mounds of stone that would outlast continents. Their very existence was rebellion, fragile yet immovable, the oldest monuments of life that still stand today. Looking at them is like hearing the faint echo of the first heartbeat, still pulsing through stone after billions of years. But even they were not invincible. Storms tore them apart, tides buried them in silt, volcanic ash smothered their growth. Again and again, they rebuilt, rising from the ruins, and each time they returned they laid more stone, more layers, more permanence carved out of impermanence. It makes me wonder if persistence itself is the only form of immortality. The more I reflect, the more personal the Archean becomes. I think of my own struggles, the times when collapse felt final, when silence felt like the end. But the Archean teaches that silence is not an end, only a threshold. Collapse clears the ground. It is not mercy, but it is possibility. Out of storms, new layers form. Out of fire, stone is laid. And perhaps our own lives mirror this ancient law, though we rarely recognize it in the moment. Still, the unease does not fade, because the Archean also tells a harsher truth. For every survival, there was loss. For every adaptation, a lineage disappeared. Life thrived, yes, but it thrived by erasing what could not endure. The silence holds not only resilience, but mourning. A mourning without memory, without voices, only stone remembering what vanished. And that thought is heavier than any rock, because it forces me to ask, in our own age, what is vanishing already? What voices are silenced, even as we build our own future? The Archean feels closer now, not billions of years away, but breathing beside us, a reminder that survival is always paired with sacrifice. Collapse is not the end, but neither is it gentle. It remakes the world whether we are ready or not. And as I stand again on that imagined volcanic shore, with lightning splitting the amber sky and waves glowing with the rust of iron, the question sharpens further. If collapse is inevitable, what form will ours take, and who or what will endure in the silence after us? The question echoes across time like the roll of thunder, carrying with it the weight of all that has lived and all that has vanished. In the Archean, collapse was the law and endurance the exception. Yet endurance, however fragile, was enough to tip the balance of an entire world. Life did not need to be strong to survive. It needed only to persist long enough for the planet itself to bend in its favour. To imagine the Archean is to imagine a world in constant motion, where permanence was an illusion, and survival a gamble renewed with every dawn. Continents were not continents, but scattered fragments, drifting across molten seas. Their edges cracked and bled magma, their centres buckled under the strain of heat rising from within the earth. The crust was thinner then, restless, shifting like skin over a fevered body, and still, life clung to it, indifferent to the violence beneath its feet. I see shallow waters near a volcanic shore, where microbial mats stretch like carpets over black rock. They glisten in the dim light, feeding on sulfur that hisses from cracks. Each mat looks fragile, yet together they cover entire coastlines, painting the edges of the sea with life. Storms crash against them, ash falls from eruptions, tides bury them in silt, yet they return again and again. Their persistence feels more powerful than any mountain, more enduring than any stone. It is not the strength of survival that matters, but the repetition of it, the refusal to end. But persistence came at a cost. Each adaptation forced others into extinction. As oxygen seeped into the oceans, those who could not endure its poison vanished. The seas became graveyards of unseen lineages, erased without record. This silent purge reshaped ecosystems again and again, until only those who could turn death into opportunity remained. It is a cruel rhythm, and yet it was that cruelty that paved the way for futures beyond imagining. Without destruction, there could have been no complexity, no breath, no us. The paradox unsettles me. We long for stability, for permanence, yet the Archean whispers that life is forged in the opposite. Creation demands destruction. Silence is never absence, only preparation. The microbes did not mourn what vanished. They did not know. But we know. And that knowledge weighs heavier than stone, because it forces us to confront the truth that survival is never clean, and every future we build is written over the bones of what came before. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I wonder whether meaning itself is a luxury of our age. The Archean knew nothing of meaning. It knew only chemistry, reaction, consequence. And yet, its silence gave birth to everything we now call meaningful. Love, memory, loss, hope. Out of blind persistence came the possibility of reflection. Out of unknowing came the power to ask why. But even as I think this, I feel the unease rise again. Because if the Archean birthed awareness without intention, what other awareness might already be stirring unseen in worlds we do not know? Perhaps we are not unique. Perhaps every Archean, scattered across the cosmos, carries its own whispers of life, its own microbes exhaling futures into their skies. And perhaps, like ours, their survival is etched in collapse, their endurance written in extinction. The thought makes me feel small, not diminished, but humbled, as though Earth's story is one verse in a song sung endlessly across time and space, and yet I cannot escape the shadow of my own question. If collapse is inevitable, what collapse waits for us? Will it come as slowly as the rise of oxygen, suffocating us generation by generation until something new replaces us? Or will it come in fire, sudden and merciless, leaving no survivors to tell of what once was? The Archean teaches me only this: endings are beginnings in disguise, and survival is never without sacrifice. I look again at that imagined shore, black rocks slick with rain, tides glowing green, lightning lacing the horizon. It is a world on the edge of ruin, yet it endures, and through endurance it becomes more than ruin. And I realise that what unsettles me most is not the silence of that ancient world, but the silence that may follow ours. The words echo like a chill across my thoughts, because they bridge billions of years with a single fear, that what came before us may also come after, and that our voices too could be swallowed by a silence as deep and indifferent as the Archean seas. When I picture that world, I see its silence not as emptiness, but as potential, the weight of beginnings hidden beneath storms. But when I picture silence after us, I see endings, unfinished, unremembered, unspoken. The Archean reminds me that silence was never void. It was a canvas. Every lightning strike, every volcanic eruption, every wave churning against black rock added strokes to that canvas, until life emerged as its first faint sketch. The silence was not stillness but foundation, waiting to be shaped. This is what unsettles me. Silence itself is never empty. It is always preparing for something. The question is whether it prepares for life or for erasure. On that imagined shore, I close my eyes and listen. The hiss of volcanic gas, the crack of thunder, the slap of waves heavy with iron. Beneath it, unseen, mats of microbes layer themselves grain by grain, their labour slow but relentless. That silence hums with creation. But then I open my eyes to our world now, filled with noise, and I wonder, is our noise masking a silence already in motion, preparing for what comes after us? The Archean silence was shaped by chemistry. Molecules collided, bonded, broke apart again and again until persistence found a pattern. Life was that pattern, fragile yet enduring. It did not arrive with fanfare. It whispered itself into existence, carving a future with each replication. If collapse was the rhythm, silence was the pause between notes, and life the unexpected melody. Yet for every melody, countless silences remained, forgotten beginnings erased before they could last. Perhaps life is not the rule, but the rare moment when silence stumbles into song. But even as I think this, I cannot ignore the truth carved into rock. Stromatolites, those layered monuments, rose again and again despite storms, despite tides, despite fire. Their silence was not fragile but unyielding. They endure still in hidden corners of earth, survivors of billions of years. When I look at them, I feel as though I am staring into the eyes of time itself. Not eyes that see, but eyes that remember. They are proof that silence is not the end. It waits, it builds, it returns. And yet, if silence builds, it also erases. The oxygen that filled the seas was not gentle. It wiped away entire lineages, leaving no record but chemical scars in stone. The paradox is cruel. The very process that shaped the possibility of our existence was also a purge that extinguished lives beyond counting. If silence is always preparation, then whose silence is it? The silence of those who perished, or the silence of those yet to come? The Archean presses on me with its contradictions. A world dim and hostile yet fertile, with beginnings. A silence full of creation, yet littered with destruction. A planet that seemed designed to erase, yet that could not stop life from persisting. It was a crucible, burning away what could not adapt, forging new futures in every collapse. That crucible did not close with the Archean. It still burns, even now, beneath our feet, above our skies, within our choices. So when I ask myself what silence may follow us, I cannot escape the Archean's answer. Silence is not nothing. It is always becoming. If we vanish, silence will not mourn us. It will prepare again for something else, for someone else. That is the law written in the stones, the law we inherit whether we acknowledge it or not. And so the unease deepens, because if silence is never empty, then perhaps the only question worth asking is not whether silence will return, but what it will carry within it when we are gone. That thought moves through me like a cold tide, a reminder that silence is not the enemy, but neither is it our ally. It is impartial, patient, waiting only for the chance to transform again. The Archean proved that silence can cradle beginnings, but it also proved that silence is built from endings. Every new song begins only after another has fallen quiet. I imagine the earth as it was then, a sphere shrouded in storms, oceans green with iron, sky dim with haze. There is no bird to cross it, no tree to stand against the wind, no sound but thunder and waves. Yet beneath that seeming emptiness, silence was fermenting with possibility. Microbes multiplied invisibly, creating networks of life that would one day flood the atmosphere with oxygen. The silence was not peace, but preparation, and it reminds me that even now, in our world of endless noise, silence may be gathering something beyond our comprehension. The Archean was not gentle in its transformations. Oxygen poisoned countless creatures that had thrived for millions of years. What was life-giving for some was death for others. This contradiction unsettles me most. Survival was not shared, but chosen, as if the planet itself were indifferent to who remained. Collapse and creation walked together, inseparable. That truth lies heavy because it forces me to see our own survival, not as permanent, but conditional. If the Archean could turn against its inhabitants, what prevents our Earth from doing the same? The rocks tell the truth with their banded iron formations, layers of red and grey that ripple through ancient cliffs. They are the frozen breath of oceans, the record of a time when silence devoured some and spared others. Standing before them feels like reading a script too vast for human eyes, a reminder that time itself does not care for fairness. Each layer is a verdict written in stone, each stripe a chapter of lives extinguished so that others could endure. Yet even in this merciless cycle, there was a strange kind of generosity. By dying, those lineages left space for survivors to expand, for new adaptations to flourish. In silence, creation stirred again. It is a rhythm that feels both cruel and necessary, one that makes me question how many silences had to pass before one finally led to us. How many times did Earth nearly lose its chance? How many beginnings were erased before this one endured? The thought unsettles me, because it pulls me into reflection. If silence is never empty, what is our silence preparing now? We release gases into the air, warm the oceans, alter the chemistry of Earth as invisibly as those microbes once did. Are we creating a silence that will prepare for another beginning? One not meant for us? Or are we simply rehearsing our own vanishing, leaving behind nothing but chemical scars for someone else to puzzle over? The Archean whispers that the line between survival and erasure is thin, often invisible until it has already been crossed. The microbes did not know when they tipped the balance, they only exhaled, unaware of the fate they were shaping. Are we any different? We measure, we predict, we analyse. But perhaps in the end, we too are blind to the scale of our influence. Perhaps the silence already waits, carrying within it the future we cannot yet see. I close my eyes and imagine that silence, heavy as the Archean seas, patient as stone. It does not rush, it does not judge, it waits, and when the time comes it will carry what it must. That is the law of the earth, written long before us and long after. And so, standing on the edge of this realization, I feel the Archean not as a distant memory, but as a living presence, its silence pressing against mine, asking without words. When our voices fade, what will the silence carry forward? The question clings to me, heavy as volcanic ash settling after a storm. It feels less like speculation and more like a prophecy whispered through stone. The Archean does not speak in words, yet its rocks hold an answer, one that chills me. Silence does not preserve everything. It chooses, it filters, it keeps fragments and erases the rest. Most of what lived in that ancient era is gone, not only from the earth but from memory itself, erased without witness. And yet, within the fragments that remain, the story of transformation persists. The silence of the Archean carried forward oxygen, a gas born from microbes that never knew what they were unleashing. Their exhalations accumulated over millions of years until the seas rusted and the sky shifted. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the balance tipped. For the first time, oxygen began to spill into the atmosphere, not only poisoning those who could not endure it, but also preparing the world for futures unimaginable. This was no minor change. It was a planetary upheaval, a rewriting of the rules. The silence had been holding its breath, and now it exhaled. I picture the moment, though in truth it stretched across eons. The haze that once cloaked the skies began to thin. Lightning still raked the heavens, volcanoes still poured rivers of fire into the sea, but above it all the atmosphere was stirring into something new. A faint trace of oxygen, invisible yet transformative, began to creep upward. The earth itself was becoming something else, no longer a world suffocating beneath its own gases, but a world preparing, however slowly, to breathe. The paradox is sharp. Oxygen was death to many, yet it was also the seed of possibilities never before seen. For the first time, energy could be stored and released in ways more efficient than ever. Life, once limited to fragile gnats and hidden colonies, would one day use oxygen to build complexity, to grow, to move. But in the Archean, this was not promise, but terror. Entire oceans were poisoned, ecosystems collapsed. What seemed like progress to us was apocalypse to them. It forces me to see progress differently. We tell ourselves stories of advancement, of growth, of triumph. But the Archean whispers otherwise. Progress is never pure. It is bought with endings, with extinctions, with silence. For every new possibility, there is a cost hidden in the ruins of what came before. The rocks do not lie. Their iron bands are records of both creation and destruction, stained red with the memory of oceans that drowned their own inhabitants. The more I reflect, the more unsettling the thought becomes. If the silence carries forward only fragments, then what of us will endure? Will it be our monuments, our cities, our words etched in stone? Or will it be something smaller, stranger, molecules released into the air, chemical traces in the ocean, scars in the rock? Perhaps what we value most will vanish, and what we never notice will persist. The Archean reminds me that legacy is not chosen by those who live it. It is chosen by silence. And perhaps that is why the Archean feels alive even now, in every breath of oxygen, in every rust-coloured stone, in every surviving stromatolite. Its silence still speaks. It tells us that transformation is always happening, always costly, always hidden until it is too late to turn back. It tells us that survival is never free, and that the silence after us will decide what of our voices remains. I stand once more on the imagined shore. The waves glow green, the sky churns copper, lightning splits the horizon. And yet, beyond the chaos, I sense a shift. Subtle, invisible, but unstoppable. The silence is beginning to change, and nothing will ever be the same again. That shift is like a shadow at the edge of vision. You cannot see it clearly, yet you know it is there. In the Archean, this transformation was not an event, but a tide. Slow, inevitable, shaping the world grain by grain, breath by breath. What had been silence turned into a force, a presence that did not simply prepare, but commanded. The oxygen trickling into the atmosphere began to accumulate, unseen yet relentless. At first it made no difference. The seas remained green, the air toxic to us, the ski copper with haze. But over millions of years the change grew louder. The haze began to clear, letting more light strike the oceans. The seas, poisoned and rusting, laid down new layers of stone. And above it all the first hints of a breathable sky began to take shape, though no creature alive then could have used it. The irony is sharp. Oxygen, our breath, was first a death sentence. It was survival for no one, until it became survival for us. I find myself haunted by the idea that the greatest transformations begin unnoticed. A gas no one could see, exhaled by microbes too small to imagine, rewrote the planet without ceremony. Not with fire, not with sudden violence, but with quiet persistence. It forces me to wonder, how often in our own lives does change arrive in silence? How often does the future begin in places too small for us to notice, only to surround us when it's already too late to turn back? The Archean was full of contradictions. Volcanoes tore the seas apart, and yet life thrived near their vents. Asteroids still scarred the planet, but each wound created new environments for survival. The crust shifted constantly, yet in shallow waters, stromatolites grew patiently, layer upon layer. Life did not rage against destruction. It endured it, folded it into its rhythm, turned it into a tool. The silence of the Archean was not peace, but resilience, a refusal to end. And yet resilience came at a cost. Every surge of oxygen was a wave of death, suffocating those who could not adapt. Entire ecosystems disappeared, leaving no memory but minerals in stone. I cannot help but feel the weight of this cruelty, that what nourishes one future demands the erasure of another. It is the law of survival, written not in words but in silence. And I wonder, are we too bound to this law, destined to build our survival upon loss we cannot yet see? The thought pulls me inward. I think of collapse in my own life, the moments when everything I knew seemed to dissolve. At the time, it felt like endings, like silence filled only with grief. But the Archean suggests something else. Endings are thresholds, collapses are crucibles, silence is preparation. What feels unbearable now may one day be the foundation for something I cannot yet imagine. The Archean whispers that silence never leaves us empty-handed. Still, the unease lingers, because silence also erases. Most of the lineages that thrived in the Archean left no trace. They did not persist in stone. They did not leave monuments. They were forgotten completely. It forces me to ask, if silence does not keep everything, then what of us will it choose to carry forward? Will it be our cities, our words, our art? Or will it be only the gases we exhale, the scars we carve into stone, the chemical residue of our presence? Legacy is never ours to decide. It belongs to silence. And so I stand again on that imagined shore, watching the tides shimmer red with rust. The skies glow faintly as haze thins. Change is coming, unseen but unstoppable, and the world that was will vanish into silence. The Archean speaks without words. Transformation is always the cost of survival, and survival is never free. That truth seeps into me like cold water, making me shiver at its merciless clarity. To survive is not only to endure, but to erase, to alter, to reshape. The Archean did not offer life a choice between thriving and destroying. It demanded both. Every breath exhaled by a microbe was both creation and destruction, both promise and curse. That paradox lingers like smoke in the air, refusing to clear. I see it on the imagined horizon. Skies once copper, now growing thinner, touched with pale light. Oxygen creeps upward, filling the air, unnoticed by the creatures below. For them, it is a toxin, a slow and merciless tide. They suffocate in silence, leaving no voices, no cries, no trait but the scars etched in stone. Their world ends without witness, and yet in their endings, something else is being born, a future we would one day inherit. It unsettles me, because it means life is built not on mercy, but on sacrifice. The oceans reflect this cruelty in their banded iron, each stripe a ledger of death and rebirth. Rust-red layers mark the poison of oxygen binding to iron. Grey layers mark the pauses when silence claimed dominion again. These are not colours of beauty but of violence, reminders that survival is always selective, never shared equally. Looking at them feels like opening a book that was written in blood, a record of a law too ancient and too vast to be bent by compassion. Yet in this grim story, there is resilience. Stromatolites continue to rise, patient monuments to persistence. Layer upon layer they built their structures, even as oceans turned against them. They did not resist change, they endured it, weaving survival from whatever silence remained. Their legacy is humbling. They are among the few living beings whose line reaches directly back to that age, still alive in hidden corners of Earth today. When I imagine touching one, I feel as though I touch not just stone, but the memory of the Archean itself. The thought unsettles me further, because if stromatolites endured 3.5 billion years, if they survived silences that devoured lineages beyond counting, then what excuse do we have for believing ourselves permanent? We measure our history in thousands of years, yet they have stood for billions, quietly shaping the world while empires rose and fell like waves. Their silence is not weakness but power, a reminder that the greatest transformations often happen without noise, without recognition, without witnesses. And then I realised something darker. Silence did not only preserve stromatolites, it preserved their competitors' absence too. The microbes that could not endure oxygen are gone, erased so thoroughly that we cannot even imagine their shapes. Silence remembers the survivors, but it forgets the rest. That is the cruelty of time. It does not hold everything. It edits, it filters, it discards. Our fear is not only of silence itself, but of being forgotten by it. The Archean whispers this fear into me. We too will be filtered. Our monuments may crumble, our words may vanish, our images may dissolve. What will remain? Perhaps only scars in the atmosphere, traces of chemicals in the soil, faint echoes in stone. Perhaps silence will carry forward not who we were, but only what we left behind without intending. That is the truth the Archean repeats. Survival is not memory. Memory belongs to silence, and silence chooses. Standing again on that volcanic shore in my imagination, I hear the hiss of gas, the crackle of lightning, the endless slap of iron-rich waves. Above, the haze begins to thin, changes stirring, slow but unrelenting. Life does not know it yet, but the crucible is preparing for another trial. Survival will demand sacrifice again, and silence will choose what remains. And I cannot escape the weight of the question it leaves behind. If silence is both creator and destroyer, what will it decide to carry from us? The question coils inside me like smoke, refusing to settle. Silence chose to carry forward the traces of oxygen, the scars of rust, the layered stones of stromatolites, but it discarded the voices of countless lineages that lived and died unseen. Silence remembers only what serves its rhythm. It is neither merciful nor cruel, it is indifferent. That indifference is what chills me, because it means nothing guarantees our memory. In the Archean, memory was written not in words, but in chemistry. The seas turned red, then grey, then red again, as oxygen rose and fell in waves. Each shift was a sentence in Earth's first diary, a diary we can still read today in cliffs and quarries. Yet that diary is incomplete, missing nearly all the details of lives once teeming beneath those waters. Their movements, their shapes, their struggles, gone. Only the consequences of their existence remain, etched in stone. It reminds me that history is never the full story. It is only what silence permits to endure. I walk along that imagined shore again. The air is heavy, acrid, thick with gases I cannot breathe. The sea is restless, green waves crashing against black volcanic rock. Lightning flashes overhead, its glow briefly illuminating the thin mats of microbes clinging to the stones. To me, they are invisible in their smallness. To the earth, they are destiny. They are rewriting the future with every breath, though they do not know it. Their silence is not ignorance, but inevitability. They shape without meaning, and meaning comes only later, written by those who survive. It is in this realization that unease deepens into something heavier. If silence is the author of memory, then meaning may not matter. What matters is consequence. Those microbes did not care whether their breath would poison or create. They only exhaled. We, too, release our breath, our waste, our choices into the world. We give them meaning, but silence does not care for meaning. Silence keeps only what it will, discards the rest, and in doing so, writes the script of futures we cannot predict. The Archean was full of deaths no one mourned. Whole lineages vanished, their silence unmarked. Yet in that erasure, something extraordinary unfolded. The rise of oxygen transformed Earth from a suffocating world into one where complex life would someday be possible. This contradiction leaves me restless. Every breath I take now is an inheritance from their deaths. I am alive because they vanished. And so I ask myself, who, one day, will live because we are gone? It is not an easy thought. We fear erasure, but the Archean whispers that erasure is part of creation's law. What endures is rarely what we expect. Stromatolites still exist, alive and ancient, while empires have crumbled into dust. Rust-red rocks speak louder than the voices of vanished creatures. Silence has no concern for greatness, only persistence. That truth unsettles me, because it means our monuments may not matter. Our stories may not matter. What will endure may be something we never intended to leave behind. And yet, there is a strange comfort in this too. The Archean teaches that survival is never absolute, yet it is never meaningless. Even what vanishes shapes what follows, even if silence erases the details. The microbes did not know us, yet they made us possible. Perhaps what we do now will one day prepare a world for someone we will never know. Perhaps silence is not only destruction, but a bridge to futures unseen. Still, as I stand on that volcanic shore in my mind, watching the red tides churn beneath lightning-filled skies, I cannot shake the unease. Silence chooses, silence remembers, silence erases. And what silence decides to carry is never ours to command. So I ask myself again, when our turn comes, what will silence choose to remember, and what will it let vanish forever? The question feels like a weight pressing against the chest, heavier than stone, because there is no answer that offers comfort. The Archean silence was merciless, selective, discarding entire histories while preserving fragments by accident. If silence chooses again, as it surely will, then perhaps what we hold most dear will fade, and what we ignore will endure. It is a thought as sobering as it is inevitable. I imagine the cliffs that hold the record of those ancient seas. Their iron-red bands are striking against the grey, each layer a frozen breath of the planet itself. They stand now like monuments, towering pages of a book whose words are written not in letters, but in chemistry. And yet, even they are incomplete. They tell us of oxygen's rise, of seas turning toxic, but not of the creatures who lived and died within them. Their forms, their movements, their existence, all swallowed by silence. Only the consequences remain. This makes me wonder whether consequence, not presence, is what silence values. The microbes of the Archean did not leave fossils of their bodies in abundance. What they left instead were the transformations they caused. Oceans rusting, skies clearing, climates shifting. Their memory is not their shape, but their influence. Perhaps the same will be true of us. Perhaps silence will not carry our faces, our words, or our monuments, but only the shifts we leave behind. Altered skies, scarred earth, reshaped seas. The thought unsettles me more deeply than I expected, because it means that our true legacy may not be the one we hope for. It may not be our music or our architecture or our stories. It may be the chemical signatures of our presence, the scars carved into the atmosphere, the traces of plastics or metals layered into the rock. These might be what silence carries forward, not as a memory of who we were, but as evidence of what we did. Silence does not preserve meaning. It preserves impact. And yet, there is something hauntingly familiar in this. The Archean tells me that even forgotten lives mattered, even erased lineages shaped the path forward. They left no monuments, but their breath altered the air. They left no stories, but their silence carried futures into being. It forces me to reconsider what matters most. Is it to be remembered, or to have mattered in ways unseen? Still, the human part of me resists this truth. I long for memory, for continuity, for the assurance that our voices will not vanish into the same silence that devoured theirs. But the Archean shows no mercy to such desires. It whispers instead that silence will choose on its own terms, not ours. That is its law, written into stone, older than our fears. To resist it is futile. To understand it is unsettling. So I return to that ancient shore in my mind, standing on black volcanic rock while red-green waves crash at my feet. Lightning fractures the sky, sulfur burns in the air, and yet beneath it all, in the mats of microbes clinging to stone, life persists, indifferent to my presence. They will not be remembered as individuals. Their names are lost before they are even imagined. But their influence will echo forever in the atmosphere, in the seas, in every breath I take now. And so the Archean presses its truth into me. Silence is not cruel, but it is indifferent. It does not care for memory or meaning. It only carries what endures, and endurance is rarely what we expect. If endurance is rarely what we expect, then what quiet traces of us will survive the silence, and which of our voices will be erased without a sound? The question strikes like lightning over the Archean horizon, a sudden flare that reveals how fragile permanence really is. I think of those first oceans, green and restless, their tides carrying not only iron and sulfur, but the seeds of futures no one could have foreseen. The microbes clinging to stone had no names, no memory, no ambition. Yet their traces remain in every breath we take. Their voices were erased, but their silence endured. And here, in this realization, something sharp cuts through the haze. Endurance is never guaranteed, but when it comes in unexpected forms. The Archean reminds me that survival is not always about strength or greatness. It is about persistence, about existing long enough to alter the world in ways that cannot be undone. Those microbes endured not because they sought to, but because they adapted blindly, exhaling into silence, reshaping oceans molecule by molecule. Their quiet was more powerful than any roar. I imagine the moment when oxygen first broke the surface of the sea, spilling into the air. To us it would feel like a miracle, the first step toward a world we could one day breathe. But to them it was a toxin, death spreading invisibly across their waters. What we call creation, they experienced as collapse. Their seas became rust-red tombs, their colonies suffocated by their own breath. I can almost hear the waves groaning with iron, heavy and scarlet, as though the planet itself bled for its transformation. This paradox weighs heavily on me. Oxygen, our lifeline, was born from death. Every forest, every heartbeat, every human word spoken in the air is an inheritance of their catastrophe. Survival for us was ruin for them. It makes me wonder whether every gift the earth gives is also a wound hidden beneath. When I breathe because they died. When I speak, my voice is carried on their extinction, and yet I cannot escape the awe. Out of fire, poison, and silence, something astonishing was forged. The Archean did not offer safety, yet it demanded resilience, and resilience responded. What overwhelms me is the thought that this pattern has never ended. Collapse, transformation, survival, always entwined, always inseparable. The Archean was not only history, it was rehearsal, a rhythm written into the planet itself, still echoing now. Perhaps this is why the Archean feels so personal. I think of my own collapses, the times when I felt erased, silenced, stripped of meaning. Yet out of those silences new beginnings eventually rose, though I could not see them at the time. The Archean whispers that collapse is not the end, but the crucible. What feels like ruin may already be shaping the ground for what comes next. The silence that follows us is not only death, but also preparation. Still, the fear remains. Silence does not promise kindness. It chooses without mercy, forgetting most and carrying forward only fragments. The microbes left no songs, no words, no monuments. Their memory is in stone, in air, in chemistry, not in story. What if the same fate awaits us? What if all we are, our voices, our dreams, our histories, are forgotten, and only our scars endure? Perhaps our greatest legacy will not be our art or our wisdom, but the traces of what we broke, what we exhaled without knowing. The Archean leaves me with this unbearable duality. Silence is both grave and womb, both erasure and preparation. And so, as I stand once more on that imagined volcanic shore, with red tides curling around my feet and lightning splitting the sky, I feel the weight of its law. To endure is to be altered, to vanish is to be remembered differently. Nothing escapes silence, and silence itself never ends. And in that moment of realization, the storm above grows louder, the waves crash harder, and I sense it fully. The Archean was not just survival, it was prophecy. The words feel carved into the bones of the earth itself, a truth too immense to ignore. That age, 3.5 billion years ago, did not only mark the fragile beginnings of life, it whispered of what survival would always mean. It spoke of cycles, of collapses turned to beginnings, of silence transformed into creation. To look back at the Archean is to glimpse not only our past, but our fate. I stand again on that imagined shore, volcanic rock slick beneath my feet, waves thick with iron striking against the land. The air burns the lungs, heavy with methane and sulfur, a world hostile to us yet fertile for those unseen microbes clinging to stone. Above, lightning laces the skies, thunder rolls endlessly, and ash drifts like snow across the sea. It feels apocalyptic, but it is not an ending. It is prophecy, because it shows that apocalypse is always followed by renewal. The prophecy is cruel in its honesty. It says that no world, no age, no species is permanent. What endures is change itself, and silence is its instrument. The microbes did not know they were writing this prophecy with every exhale, but they were. Their oxygen poisoned oceans, erased entire lineages, and yet, through destruction, the stage was set for all that would follow. It is a law that still binds us. Survival demands transformation, and transformation always demands loss. The more I dwell on it, the more I realize how human history reflects this same rhythm. Civilizations rise, flourish, collapse, and from their ruins others emerge. Languages vanish, cultures fade, yet fragments carry forward into futures unimagined. The Archean whispers that this is not coincidence. It is the pattern written into the fabric of life itself. Collapse is not failure, it is inheritance. Each silence prepares the ground for what will come next. And yet, the prophecy unsettles me, because it carries no promise of our permanence. Just as the Archean microbes could not imagine us, we cannot imagine what may come after us. Perhaps our ruins will be their foundations, our silence their beginning. It humbles me, but it frightens me too, because it means our story may not be the climax we believe it to be. We may be only a passage, only another rehearsal, just as the Archean was for us. I think again of the stromatolites, those layered monuments still alive today. They are survivors of prophecy, their persistence a bridge across billions of years. To touch one is to touch the silence of the Archean, still living, still whispering. Their prophecy is not spoken in words, but in endurance, in patience that outlasted fire and stone. They remind me that the truest legacy is not glory, but survival itself. And yet even they endured by erasing others, by thriving in niches where competitors suffocated. Even their survival was bought with silence. This realization presses inward, personal now. How many silences have shaped me? How many collapses felt like endings, only to reveal themselves later as beginnings? And yet, In the moment, all I felt was loss. The Archean teaches me that prophecy cannot be seen while it is being lived. It can only be recognised afterward, when silence has already chosen what to carry forward. That truth frightens me, because it means we cannot know what part of us will endure, or whether we will endure at all. The storm above the Archean seas grows louder in my mind, lightning splitting the sky into shards of white fire. The prophecy of survival written in silence hangs heavy, not as reassurance, but as warning. We are not exempt from the law they wrote. Their prophecy is ours too, and if we listen closely, the silence of the earth is still speaking it, even now. And I realise with a chill that the prophecy of the Archean is not finished. It is still unfolding, and we are only part of its verse. The realisation hangs over me like a storm cloud, dark and unyielding. We often imagine the Archean as something sealed away in the vaults of prehistory, a chapter long closed. But the truth is far more unsettling. Its silence still shapes our air, its scars still mark our rocks, its legacy still flows in every breath we take. We are not outside of its story. We are entangled within it, characters who think themselves separate, though the script was written long before us. I look again at the oceans of that time in my mind's eye. They boil with volcanic heat, shimmer with iron, churn under lightning that never ceases. Yet within those hostile waters, life persists. It breathes, it adapts, it endures. Every molecule of oxygen released then is still part of our world now, recycled endlessly through forests, seas and lungs. The prophecy continues in the very act of respiration, linking us to microbes that never knew our names and never needed to. Their prophecy is our present. But if prophecy is still unfolding, then what lies ahead? The Archean shows that every transformation carries both creation and destruction. Oxygen brought the possibility of complexity, but it also erased entire worlds. It was both salvation and apocalypse. That duality frightens me because it means our own age too may be balanced on the edge of such a transformation. The gases we release into the sky may not feel like prophecy, but neither did theirs. Change does not ask permission. It accumulates silently until it cannot be ignored. I cannot help but reflect on the cruelty of it, for the lineages erased by oxygen. There was no warning, no second chance. Their seas turned against them, their silence complete. What survived did not win by intention, but by chance, by chemistry, by sheer persistence. If prophecy is law, then it is a merciless one, demanding sacrifice without consent. And still, it is the only reason I exist to ponder it now. My breath is borrowed from their loss, my life a continuation of their erased futures. This realization presses deeper into me, turning the Archean from history into mirror. What if we too are part of a prophecy whose outcome we cannot foresee? What if our silence will one day prepare the way for something unimaginable, just as theirs prepared for us? It is humbling, but it is also terrifying, because it means our end may not be an end at all, but only another verse in a story that will never close. The storm of that ancient world grows sharper in my mind. I see the seas shifting from green to rust red, the haze above thinning, the atmosphere changing molecule by molecule. Each storm is violent, each eruption catastrophic, yet within the chaos there is direction. The silence is not idle. It is working, sculpting, preparing, and what it prepares for is not kindness, not cruelty, but continuation. That is the prophecy. Silence never ends. It only transforms. And so, as I walk the imagined black shore, the waves lapping at my feet, I cannot shake the feeling that we are rehearsing our own silence even now. The Archean did not end with the rise of oxygen. It evolved into the next silence, and the one after that, each carrying forward fragments of what came before. Perhaps our silence will be no different. Perhaps it has already begun. The prophecy of the Archean is alive, breathing with us, whispering in the air, etched into the stone beneath our feet. And if it is still unfolding, then it demands a question I cannot escape. Are we prepared to accept that our voices may be only a fleeting verse, carried for a time, then surrendered to silence. The question lingers, suspended like ash in the air after an eruption, refusing to settle. To think of our voices as temporary, as fragile as the whispers of microbes in the Archean seas, unsettles the deepest part of me. We build monuments, write histories, craft songs, all in defiance of silence. But the Archean teaches that silence is not defeated. It is only delayed. And when it returns, it decides what stays and what vanishes forever. On that volcanic shore in my mind, I see the ocean shimmering with iron once more. The tide turns red with rust as oxygen continues its invisible work, transforming the chemistry of the planet. Whole lineages vanish, their absence unmarked, their silence complete. Yet the silence carries forward the one thing they could not control, the consequence of their existence. Oxygen builds, storm by storm, tide by tide, until the very air begins to shift. This change does not ask permission, and it does not pause for grief. It continues, indifferent, inevitable. This indifference is perhaps the hardest truth to bear. The Archean reveals a world where survival was not rewarded but accidental, where extinction was not punishment but consequence. The microbes that endured did so not because they were better, but because their chemistry aligned with the shifting tides. It was chance, repetition, persistence, nothing more. That realization pierces me, because it means our own survival may be equally fragile, equally accidental, balanced on choices and forces we cannot fully control. And yet there is a strange kind of hope within this. If silence is inevitable, then so is renewal. The Archean did not end life when it erased. It redefined it. Each collapse carried with it a beginning disguised as loss. The seas turned toxic, yet in those poisoned waters, new life found ways to breathe. Oxygen was a curse until it became a blessing. Silence was a grave until it became a womb. The paradox does not comfort, but it steadies me, reminding me that endings are never as final as they seem. I cannot help but wonder how many Archeans may exist beyond our world, other planets, distant and unseen, wrapped in storms, their oceans churning, their skies toxic. Perhaps their silences are carrying the same prophecies, rehearsing the same cycles of collapse and renewal. Perhaps life is not unique, but inevitable, wherever silence and chemistry meet. The thought expands the horizon of the Archean until it stretches across the universe, whispering that we are not alone, only one verse among many. Still, the prophecy is personal too. It whispers into my own silences, the moments when life felt erased, when meaning dissolved. The Archean teaches me that silence prepares. It strips away, it erases, but it also shapes the ground for what will come. To endure is to accept this rhythm, to surrender to it, to allow silence to be not only destruction but transformation. That truth unsettles, but it also heals, because it means no silence is truly empty. I stand again on that black shore, waves breaking at my feet, the air heavy with sulfur and ash. The lightning above splits the sky into fleeting brightness, then darkness again. In the rhythm of light and dark I feel the prophecy, collapse, silence, renewal. The microbes continue their work unseen, exhaling futures into the storm. They do not know, they do not intend, but their silence carries forward a destiny greater than themselves. And as I breathe now, carrying their legacy in my lungs, I realize the question has shifted. It is not whether silence will return. It always does. It is whether we can accept that silence is not the end, but the next beginning. The phrase circles in my mind like waves against the Archean shore, striking again and again until its truth cannot be denied. To see silence not as void, but as preparation changes everything. It turns endings into thresholds, collapses into crucibles. The Archean was proof of this. Its silence was filled with destruction. Yes, but also with birth. It was the world's first rehearsal of a law that would never end. I picture the seas of that age, rust red with oxygen binding to iron, suffocating countless lives. Their silence must have been absolute, unmarked by memory or voice. And yet, out of that silence, new lineages arose, ones capable of enduring oxygen's strange presence. What killed many became the breath of others. This is the duality that shakes me. Silence both erased and created. To accept this is to accept that survival is never without cost. But the Archean holds another secret, one that chills me further. We often imagine life then as a slow march toward progress, as though the world were always destined to produce forests, animals, humans. Yet the rocks tell a different story. The Archean was not a straight line, but a battlefield, its victories written in silence, its losses erased. We were not inevitable. We were one possibility among many, one survival layered over countless extinctions. This is the part of the prophecy that unsettles me most. We were not chosen. We were accidental. The thought makes me pause because it strips away the comfort of destiny. If life was not guaranteed, then neither are we. The Archean whispers that permanence is an illusion, that every age is fragile, contingent, conditional. Civilizations, species, even planets, all are bound to silence eventually. And yet, within that inevitability, there is resilience. Each silence carries forward something, even if it is not what was intended. The Archean proves that even erasure is not absolute. Something always remains, even if it is only the chemistry of air or the layering of stone. I think of stromatolites again, those quiet builders still rising in shallow waters today. They endured while so much else vanished. Their persistence is not glamorous, not loud, but it is powerful. They are living bridges across billions of years, their silence more enduring than empires. And in them, I see the hidden truth. Survival is not always spectacular. Sometimes it is humble, patient, unseen. Sometimes it is silence itself. But even as I consider this, unease grows. If silence is not the end, but the next beginning, then whose beginning will our silence prepare? Just as the Archean prepared for us without intention, perhaps we are preparing for others we will never know. Our gases, our scars, our remnants may one day be their foundation. This is the true weight of prophecy. It does not belong to us. It belongs to those who come after. And what if those who come after are not human at all? What if they are nothing like us, shaped instead by a world remade in silence after we are gone? Just as oxygen was poisoned before it became breath, perhaps what destroys us will nourish them. The Archean whispers that we are not the culmination, only a chapter. And that thought is both humbling and terrifying, because it means our silence may be the soil for futures we cannot imagine. The storm rises again in my vision. Lightning fractures the sky. Waves crash against black stone, ash drifts thick as snow. Yet beneath it all, silence waits, preparing as it always has. The Archean is not finished. Its prophecy continues, threading through us into whatever comes next. And the question presses harder now. When our silence arrives, what seed will it carry, and what future will grow from it? The question does not drift away. It roots itself deeper, like a tree sprouting in ash. I think again of the Archean, of those first oceans, and I see that every silence was a seed. Each extinction became soil for something new. Each collapse, though merciless, cleared a path for survival in another form. The Archean teaches that silence is not barren. It germinates futures, and yet the terrifying truth is that the future it prepares may not include us. The oxygen that once drowned oceans was one such seed. Invisible, silent, released in breaths too small to notice, it reshaped everything. It was poison, apocalypse, and yet, over time, it became possibility. The seas filled with rust, entire lineages vanished, but what survived found a way to thrive in oxygen's presence. That seed grew into forests, into creatures, into us. It grew into a planet breathing differently, forever altered by the silence of those who could not endure. Their deaths nourished the air I now inhale. This cycle unsettles me because it feels both inevitable and indifferent. Silence does not ask who deserves to remain. It carries only what endures long enough to matter. The Archean shows that endurance is not about greatness, but alignment, a chance resonance with the conditions of the world. The survivors were not chosen. They were not favoured. They were simply the ones who fit the silence that followed. This truth shakes me, because it means we too are at the mercy of alignments we cannot always see. Still, I cannot ignore the strange comfort in this. For even those who vanished were not wasted. Their silence became foundation. Their erasure became possibility. It is cruel, but it is also profound. Nothing is ever truly lost, only transformed. The Archean whispers that we may vanish, but something will continue, carried forward by silence, growing in places we cannot imagine, and perhaps that is legacy enough. But then another thought rises, darker. What if the seed our silence carries is not life, but ruin? What if what we leave behind is not oxygen, but poison too lasting, too deep for renewal? The Archean silence always prepared, always nurtured, even in its cruelty. But are we capable of leaving silence fertile? Or will we carve scars so deep that silence itself will struggle to heal? This is the burden the Archean presses onto me. Its silence gave breath. Will ours do the same? I return in my mind to the volcanic shore. The waves shimmer red with rust. The skies break open with lightning. The air stings with sulfur. And still, beneath it all, mats of microbes grow patiently, their persistence unnoticed, their silence preparing. They do not know they are shaping futures. They cannot imagine us. Yet here we are, heirs of their silence, breathing their legacy. If silence carried us once, perhaps it will again, though it may not be us who walks in that future. This realization bends inward, toward my own mortality. I too will return to silence. My voice will fade, my body vanish, but perhaps something will carry forward, unseen, unnoticed, reshaped into another beginning. The Archean whispers that silence is never final, only transition. That truth frightens me, but it also steadies me. To vanish is not to be erased. To vanish is to prepare. So I look again at that imagined horizon, storms, fire, waves, and I see not chaos but prophecy. Silence is patient. It waits, it gathers, and then it releases. The Archean was proof of this, and so too will our silence be proof for what comes after. And the question that burns now is no longer whether silence will come. It will. The question is whether the seed it carries will blossom into life again, or whether it will bloom only in ruin. That thought clings to me like the haze that once wrapped the Archean skies, dense, suffocating, yet alive with hidden possibility. To imagine silence as a gardener unsettles me, for it does not plant with care nor nurture with intention. It scatters seeds without choosing what will grow, and then it erases what cannot endure. The Archean was such a garden, one where death fertilized creation, and creation demanded death in return. I see those rust-red oceans once more, their tides churn with iron, their depth boiling with chemical storms invisible to eyes. In them, lineages bloom and vanish, erased as quickly as they appear. The oxygen creeping upward is not kind. It spreads like a shadow, unseen, inevitable. The silence it brings feels merciless, and yet, without it, nothing of us would exist. The paradox presses like a stone. Ruin and renewal are inseparable. Two faces of the same silence. It makes me turn inward. If our silence is also a garden, what seeds are we scattering now? We leave behind more than monuments and words. We leave gases in the air, plastics in the seas, metals in the soil. Perhaps these are not scars but seeds. though whether they grow into life or ruin is beyond us to know. The Archean teaches that consequence, not intention, shapes the future. What mattered was not what microbes meant to do, but what their silence carried. The same will be true of us. This thought frightens me, because it means our control is illusion. We speak of mastery, of dominion, of bending Earth to our will. But the Archean whispers that the Earth has never bent. It endures, it shifts, it transforms, but always on its own terms. The microbes did not master the planet. They merely aligned with its chemistry. We may not be masters either, only participants in a silence already preparing the next beginning. Still, the question of seeds remains. What grows from silence is not always visible in its time. The Archean microbes could not see forests rising from their breath. They could not see lungs forming, voices speaking, humans imagining their ancient world. Their silence planted seeds for futures they would never know. And so I wonder, what futures will our silence prepare, unseen, unimaginable, waiting beyond the horizon of our time? The cliffs that hold the Archean's memory stand like testaments to this truth. Each band of iron is a seed preserved, each layer a record of silence transforming into life again. When I look at them, I feel the weight of time pressing down, a reminder that seeds do not sprout immediately. Some wait millions of years before finding the right conditions. Perhaps our silence too will carry seeds that will not bloom until ages after us. But here, unease deepens, because seeds can bloom into ruin as well as life. The Archean prepared oxygen, and from it came forests and animals. But it also prepared extinction, wiping away what could not adapt. Silence does not discriminate. It carries everything, and the future grows from whatever it is given. This truth chills me, because it means our legacy may not be beauty or life, but a silence heavy with scars. And yet, even scars can shape futures. On that imagined volcanic shore, I watch waves glow red under the dim light of a young sun. The silence of the Archean hums beneath the storm, carrying futures no one can see. And I realise that silence is not cruel because it chooses destruction. It is cruel because it does not choose at all. It carries everything, and everything has its chance to grow. Life or ruin, birth or erasure. And so I am left with this unyielding question. If silence is both soil and grave, what harvest will rise from the silence we leave behind? The question is not distant. It feels immediate, like a breath caught in the throat. The Archean shows that harvests do not always resemble the seeds. The microbes that filled their seas with oxygen could never have imagined that forests, birds, and voices would grow from their silence. Their legacy was unrecognizable even to themselves, and perhaps ours will be the same. Not a continuation of us, but something wholly other, born from what we leave without intending. This unsettles me, because it strips away the illusion of control. We plant deliberately, we build monuments, we preserve knowledge, all in an effort to shape the future. But the Archean teaches otherwise. What truly endures is often what was never chosen, never planned. It is the chemical scars, the silent accumulations, the traces left behind when intention has already failed. Silence carries what it will, not what we wish. I imagine again those iron-red seas, their surfaces shimmering under the faint sun. To us they look hostile, toxic, even, deadly. Yet within them life persisted, adjusted, survived. The silence that seemed so absolute was already preparing futures no one could see. That is its cruelty and its gift. Silence does not announce its harvest until long after the seeds are sown, and by then the voices that sowed them are already gone. The cliffs that rise today with their banded iron layers are monuments not to presence, but to absence. They are the voices of extinction, preserved only as chemistry. And yet, within that absence, something new grew. The harvest was not the microbes themselves, but the possibility their silence created. This thought both humbles and terrifies me, because it suggests that what will endure of us may not be our stories or our monuments, but the unintended seeds hidden in our silence. Perhaps our silence will carry forward traces of carbon, metals, plastics, scars etched into the crust of the earth. Perhaps those will be the seeds, and what grows from them will be nothing like us. Perhaps another age will rise, built on the ruins we leave, its life-breathing air we never could, its silence remembering us not in words but in stone. This is the true harvest of silence. It remembers consequences, not intentions. The Archean whispers this lesson with every band of iron, every surviving stromatolite. Endurance is not glory, it is persistence, and persistence often looks nothing like what we dream. The microbes did not dream, yet their silence remade the earth. We dream endlessly, yet our silence may carry something entirely alien to us. That realization is as unsettling as it is liberating, because it means legacy is not ours to control. It is silence's to decide. I return in thought to that volcanic shore, the sky dark with ash, the sea restless and red. Each wave feels heavy, laden with both death and promise. The microbes cling still to rock, patient, indifferent, exhaling futures they cannot see. Their silence is not empty, it is pregnant with worlds. And as I breathe in my own time, I cannot escape the truth that my silence too will one day carry something I cannot imagine. The harvest of silence is never what we expect. That is the law of the Archean, and it is still the law now. It whispers into me, pressing with a question that feels as old as stone itself. When our silence ripens, what future will it give birth to? And will that future see us as creators, or only as the erased? The question cuts through me like the jagged edge of obsidian, sharp and unyielding. The Archean whispers that the future never judges with kindness. It does not look back to offer gratitude or condemnation. It looks forward, indifferent, carrying only what silence has preserved. If we are remembered, it will not be as we imagine, but as fragments, as consequences etched in stone. The cliffs that hold the Archean's memory remind me of this truth. Their red and grey layers speak not of creatures or voices, but of chemistry, of oceans changing colour, under the weight of oxygen. They are records of transformation without intention. They do not remember the names of those who vanished, only the mark they left on the earth itself. This is how silence remembers, not as story, but as residue. And I wonder if our legacy will be no different. Not our words or dreams, but the residue of our existence, scattered across the crust of the world. Perhaps our silence will be marked in layers of plastic and carbon, in metals buried where they never belonged, in warming seas and altered skies. To us these are crises, to silence they are seeds, and seeds do not ask whether they were planted with love or neglect. They only grow. This is the cruelty of it. Silence does not weigh intention. It carries forward whatever endures, whatever lingers after voices fade, and what lingers is not always what we hoped. The Archean knew this well. The microbes did not hope for forests or animals or humans. They did not imagine futures at all. Yet their silence prepared the way. The harvest of their erasure was not them, but us. And we in turn may not be the harvest we think we are. The silence we leave behind may grow futures that look nothing like us, futures that cannot even comprehend that we once existed. This thought humbles me, for it means that meaning is not fixed in the moment. Meaning is shaped in silence, after we are gone, when the seeds we scattered unknowingly have had time to grow. The Archean teaches me that meaning is retrospective, decided by futures we cannot imagine. And this, more than anything, unsettles me, because it means we cannot control our legacy. Silence writes it, not us. I return to that volcanic shore, its rocks black and slick, its skies heavy with lightning. The air burns with gases unbreathable, and yet life persists, silent and unseen, preparing futures without knowledge. To stand there, even in imagination, is to feel the smallness of our control. The silence of the earth is vast, older than us, stronger than us, and it will continue long after us. We are a verse in its song, not the whole melody. And yet, there is a strange consolation in this. If silence decides what endures, then nothing is ever truly wasted. Even what vanishes becomes part of the soil for what follows. The microbes that suffocated in oxygen were not wasted. They became the ground on which others thrived. Perhaps we too will serve as soil, even if we are forgotten. Perhaps to be erased is not failure, but participation in a rhythm older than memory itself. Still, the question will not let me go. If silence is both soil and grave, then our harvest will come. But will it bloom into life or ruin? And more haunting still, will anyone be there to witness it, to name it, to wonder who we were? Or will the silence itself be the only witness, carrying our trace forward without eyes, without memory, without care? The image strikes me with a chilling clarity. To imagine silence as the only witness is to imagine a world stripped of presence, where the earth itself is the sole keeper of what remains. Rocks do not grieve, seas do not remember, skies do not honour. They only hold, and even their holding is temporary, shifting with time until traces blur into obscurity. The Archean teaches this harsh truth. Its silence carried forward fragments, but never the whole. It preserved oxygen in the air, iron in the rocks, stromatolites in shallow seas. But it forgot the countless lineages erased in its crucible. Their voices, their movements, their fragile persistence, gone without echo. If silence is the only witness, then it is a witness without empathy, without care for detail. It records not the story, but the consequence. This realization makes me uneasy, because it suggests that remembrance is not universal. We believe memory is sacred, but silence is indifferent. The Archean did not remember meaning. It remembered chemistry. Its harvest was not stories, but transformations. And perhaps that is the only memory the earth will ever keep of us, not who we were, but what we altered. I see again those ancient seas, glowing red under a dim sun. In their depths, microbes multiply, exhaling futures they cannot fathom. Their silence is absolute, yet it is fertile. They are not remembered individually, but their impact endures in every breath we take. Their witness was silence itself, and silence carried forward what mattered, even if they never knew it. And here, another thought unsettles me. Perhaps to be remembered is not the point. Perhaps the true legacy is not to be seen or named, but to leave behind conditions that allow something else to flourish. The Archean lineages that vanished are forgotten, but their silence prepared a world where others could endure. Their absence became presence in another form. Could this be our fate as well? To vanish utterly, but to serve as the soil for futures beyond imagining? Still, I resist. My human heart yearns for continuity, for remembrance, for assurance that our voices will not dissolve into nothingness. We carve our names in stone, we record our histories, we preserve our images, all in defiance of silence. But the Archean whispers that such efforts are small against the weight of time. Stone erodes, memory fades, silence remains. Its witness is not in the names it preserves, but in the air we breathe, the ground we walk upon, the transformations hidden in plain sight. The paradox is cruel. Silence forgets almost everything, and yet it ensures that nothing is wasted. Even erasure becomes preparation. Even absence becomes foundation. The Archean silence shows me that legacy does not belong to individuals, but to processes, to cycles, to transformations that ripple outward long after voices fade. To demand to be remembered is to ask silence to break its law, and silence does not break. So I stand again on that imagined volcanic shore, the waves glowing with rust, the air heavy with gases no human could endure. Above, lightning fractures the sky into fleeting brightness. The silence there is thick, humming with unseen futures. It does not see me, it does not care, but it carries. It always carries, and in that carrying it prepares, indifferent yet eternal. The Archean leaves me with a truth I cannot escape. Silence is the only witness that endures. It remembers not who we were, but what we left behind, and what it carries forward is never ours to choose. If silence is the only witness that endures, then perhaps the real question is not whether we will be remembered, but what of us will be carried at all? That thought twists within me, unsettling in its simplicity. Memory, as we define it, may be an illusion, a fragile thread we weave for ourselves. But silence, vast, impartial, endless, carries only what refuses to fade. The Archean reveals this law without mercy. It remembered not the voices of those who lived, but the oxygen they left, the stones they stained, the transformations they caused. I see once more the oceans of that age, restless and red, waves foaming with iron. In those waters billions of lives flourished and perished, yet their memory is gone. What remains is consequence, not story. The cliffs that rise today bear no names, no shapes, no whispers. They carry instead the chemistry of extinction, the residue of survival, the evidence of transformation. That is silence's ledger, stripped of detail, rich with truth. So what of us will be carried? Our monuments may crumble, our voices dissolve into air, but silence will preserve something. Perhaps it will be the gases we released into the atmosphere, written in the chemistry of the sky. Perhaps it will be plastics buried in sediment, layered like artificial fossils. Perhaps it will be radiation signatures, etched invisibly into stone. These are not the legacies we dream of, but they are legacies nonetheless, carried by silence whether we accept them or not. The Archean whispers that legacy is not about intention. The microbes did not intend to change the world. They exhaled, they endured, and silence chose what to carry forward. It preserved not their bodies, but their consequences. And those consequences shaped everything that followed. Our legacy may be no different. It may not be what we hope to leave, but what we cannot help leaving behind. Silence will carry what lingers, not what we plead to preserve. This realization cuts deep because it strips away the illusion of control. We imagine we can decide how we will be remembered, but the Archean shows otherwise. Memory belongs not to us, but to silence. And silence has no loyalty to our desires. It carries only what endures, and endurance is rarely what we expect. Yet there is a strange, haunting comfort in this truth. For even if we vanish, even if our stories are forgotten, something of us will remain. It may not be our faces or names, but it will be our impact, woven into the fabric of the earth. Just as the microbes became the breath we now inhale, perhaps some fragment of us will nourish a future beyond imagination. The silence that erases us may also prepare what comes after. On that imagined volcanic shore, the storm rages on. Lightning fractures the sky. Waves shimmer red with iron. The air burns with gases that choke, and yet, beneath it all, life persists, small and unseen, exhaling futures into silence. They will not be remembered as individuals. Their voices will never be heard, but their consequences endure, carried in silence, shaping the destiny of the world. And I realize now, with a shiver, that this is the true prophecy of the Archean. We are not remembered as we wish, but as silence decides. And silence does not choose kindness. It chooses persistence. The weight of that realization presses down on me like the heavy air of the Archean skies, thick with gases no human lungs could endure. Silence has no heart, no sympathy, no regard for what we value. It does not cradle memory like we imagine. Instead, it preserves what endures, no matter how harsh, no matter how undesired. It keeps not for meaning, but for continuity. And in that continuity lies both comfort and terror. I see the iron-stained oceans again, their waves glowing red beneath a dim sun. The life within them, fragile mats of microbes clinging to stone, had no grandeur, no voice. They lived simply, exhaling into the void, and yet their persistence altered everything. Their oxygen reshaped seas, turned skies clearer, and poisoned worlds that could not adapt. They did not intend revolution, but persistence alone carried them through silence, and silence chose them, not out of mercy, but because they endured long enough to leave a mark. This lesson cuts into me because it makes clear that legacy is not measured in brilliance, but in persistence. Greatness may be forgotten, while the humblest trace endures. Stromatolites, layered patiently by microbes, still stand as monuments older than any civilization, while empires of stone and iron have already crumbled into dust. Persistence, not power, writes the script of silence, and silence, in its indifference, carries forward what lingers. I think about what we leave behind, the monuments, the languages, the stories we try to preserve. These may fade, eroded by time, swallowed by oceans, or buried under shifting earth. Yet the unnoticed fragments, the chemistry of our atmosphere, the scars of our industry, the subtle layers in stone, may outlast it all. Silence does not care for beauty or intention. It cares only for what endures, and often what endures is what we least expect. The Archean's prophecy is clear in this. The microbes left no art, no songs, no words. They left air, they left stone, they left persistence itself, and it was enough. Their silence prepared a world that would one day breathe, speak, and dream. They did not know it, but they shaped us. And perhaps we too will shape futures we will never know, not through our greatness, but through the persistence of what we cannot erase. This truth bends inward, pressing into my own sense of self. Perhaps what endures of me will not be my words, my actions, or my dreams. Perhaps it will be something I never notice, something small that lingers beyond my silence. That thought is unsettling, because it strips me of control. Yet it is also strangely freeing, because it means even in silence, something of me may carry forward, unknown, unseen, but present. On that imagined shore, the storm rages overhead. Lightning shatters the sky, ash drifts from volcanic peaks, and the sea glows red with iron. The silence is thick, humming with persistence. The microbes do not strive for glory, yet they endure. And endurance, silent and unseen, rewrites the earth. I realize then that kindness has nothing to do with it. Silence does not choose kindly, it chooses what lasts. And so I am left with a question that pierces me deeper than before. If silence carries only persistence, then what of us will endure? Will it be the fragile beauty we hope to preserve, or the scars we try to hide? Will our silence carry air that nourishes or air that poisons? We cannot decide. Silence will decide for us. And so I am left with a question that pierces me deeper than before. If silence carries only persistence, then what of us will endure? The thought lingers like the aftertaste of smoke, acrid and unshakable. We cling to our achievements as though they will last forever, but the Archean reminds me that persistence is rarely found in the places we expect. Beauty crumbles, power decays, memory fades. What survives is often humble, accidental, unnoticed, and yet it shapes everything. I look again at those microbial mats clinging to volcanic stone. To us, they are insignificant. To their own time, they were ordinary, fragile, fleeting. Yet their exhalations altered the atmosphere, sculpted oceans, and forged the possibility of breath. They did not seek endurance, they simply persisted. And silence, indifferent and vast, carried their consequence forward. Their persistence became the architecture of futures they would never see. What of us will endure? Perhaps not the monuments we carve or the histories we write. Perhaps instead it will be the chemistry of our skies, marked forever by our presence. Perhaps it will be the artificial materials buried in stone, seeds of a world reshaped beyond us. Perhaps it will be neither our greatness nor our failures, but something smaller, subtler, carried unknowingly into silence. This is what unsettles me. We do not decide. Silence does, and silence does not preserve intention. The microbes did not intend to create oxygen for forests. They did not plan to build futures for creatures they could never imagine. Yet their silence became our breath. If their persistence was enough to carry us forward, then perhaps ours will carry something too, though not as we desire. The Archean whispers that legacy is not choice but consequence, written in silence without regard for what we hope. This thought bends inward, pressing against the fragility of my own existence. I wonder whether anything of me will endure. Not my name, not my words, but some trace I cannot see, a ripple, a fragment, a consequence small but persistent. The Archean suggests that even the forgotten can shape what comes after. Erasure is not the same as waste. Silence transforms absence into soil, and yet fear lingers. Persistence is not always life. Sometimes what endures is scar, ruin, fracture. The Archean seas remembered oxygen as both poison and breath, both extinction and possibility. The silence that carried it was impartial, unconcerned with whether it destroyed or created. It carried both, and let time decide. What if our persistence too is double-edged? What if what endures of us is both gift and curse, legacy and burden intertwined? The storm over the Archean shore in my mind grows heavier, thunder shaking the sky, waves surging red against black stone. Yet beneath the chaos, silence hums. The microbes do not notice the storm. They persist. And persistence, carried through silence, is enough. This vision unnerves me because it shows how smallness can outweigh grandeur, how silence values not brilliance but endurance. And so, the question pierces again. What of us will endure? Will it be the fragile beauty of our art, or the unintended scars we leave behind? Will silence carry forward the breath of our forests, or the poison of our industries? The answer is not ours to give. It belongs to silence, and silence alone. The Archean leaves me with an unshakable truth. We are measured not by what we wish to preserve, but by what persists after we are gone. The words echo like thunder rolling across the Archean sky, unsettling in their finality. They suggest that legacy is not ours to shape, no matter how much we try to bend time to our will. We build monuments, carve names in stone, record stories, all as defences against forgetting. Yet the Archean reminds me that stone erodes, voices dissolve, stories vanish. What persists is rarely what was intended. Silence, indifferent and eternal, makes its own selections. I see again the rust-red seas, their surface shimmering like blood beneath a pale sun. Microbial mats cling to black volcanic rock, unseen yet unrelenting. They do not dream of permanence, they do not imagine futures, and yet their persistence writes a prophecy larger than themselves. Their oxygen poisons, kills, erases, but it also prepares. What persists is not their individuality, not their form, but their consequence. And consequence, once carried into silence, cannot be undone. This thought unsettles me because it overturns the very way we think about survival. We imagine we can choose what of us will endure. But the Archean shows that endurance is not chosen. It is revealed. It emerges only after silence has done its work, stripping away what cannot last, carrying forward what resists decay. And often, what endures is not glory but scar, not triumph but trace. The microbes did not endure as they were. They endured as transformation, as atmosphere, as foundation for what followed. What of us will endure in the same way? Perhaps not our words or monuments, but the air we altered, the climate we shifted, the elements we scattered into stone. These are not legacies of intention, but of persistence. They will linger when stories are gone. Silence does not care for meaning. It carries residue, and residue becomes prophecy for futures we cannot see. But here lies the revelation that chills me most. Silence has never been passive. It is not emptiness, not stillness. It is active, shaping, transforming, preparing. In the Archean, silence erased whole lineages, but in doing so it opened space for others. It destroyed, but it also created. It was both grave and womb. And perhaps it still is. Perhaps the silence that waits for us will not only erase, but also prepare, turning our absence into someone else's beginning. The cliffs of banded iron whisper this truth. Each layer is not only a record of death, but also of birth. Oxygen killed, but it also nourished. Lineages perished, but others arose. Silence was never final. It was transition. And in this realization lies the final prophecy of the Archean. Silence itself is not the end of the story. It is the author of the next chapter. This revelation shifts everything. To see silence not as emptiness but as author is to accept that our vanishing is not final. We will not decide what follows us. Silence will. It will carry fragments forward, weave them into futures we cannot imagine, and leave us behind without memory. Yet in that erasure, we may still matter, not as remembered beings, but as foundations unseen. On that volcanic shore in my mind, the storm grows heavier. The sky cracks with light. The sea roars red, and the air hisses with fire and ash. The microbes persist, unaware, indifferent. They do not know they are shaping eternity, but they are. Their silence is prophecy, and so, perhaps, is ours. The words echo in me with a gravity that feels immovable. To accept that prophecy is not written in intention, but in silence, unsettles everything I thought I understood about legacy. We imagine that shaping eternity requires vision, will, brilliance. Yet the Archean whispers that eternity is shaped instead by what persists unnoticed, by breaths released without thought, by consequences that outlast meaning. I picture again the stromatolites, layered patiently in shallow seas. They are not majestic in appearance. They are simple, repetitive, almost unremarkable, and yet they have survived billions of years, bridging the Archean to our time. Their silence carries across epochs, reminding me that eternity listens not to greatness, but to persistence. And perhaps this is the truth we resist most. Our brilliance may fade, but our persistence cannot be ignored. This thought shifts my view of history itself. Civilizations rise, build, collapse, and vanish. Yet what persists are not their monuments, but their consequences. Fields once tilled remain altered. Rivers once dammed remain redirected. Languages vanish, but words absorbed into others endure. The Archean whispers that nothing is truly lost, though almost everything is forgotten. Persistence is subtle, not grand, but it is what silence carries. In this light, my fear of erasure softens slightly. To be forgotten does not mean to vanish. To vanish does not mean to be wasted. Even absence becomes presence in another form. The Archean shows this clearly. Billions of lives lost, erased utterly, and yet their silence became the oxygen I now breathe. Their prophecy was not in their survival, but in their consequence, and so perhaps ours will be the same. Yet the unease remains, for silence is impartial. It carries persistence, but it does not promise kindness. What we leave behind may nourish futures, or burden them. The oxygen that poisoned seas became breath for forests, but it also killed countless lineages. The silence that carried it did not choose which outcome to favour. It carried both, and let time decide. Our silence may do the same. It may prepare futures of life, or futures of ruin, and neither outcome will carry our voice. On that volcanic shore in my imagination, the storm has grown quieter. The waves are still red with iron, the sky still fractured by lightning, but the silence feels heavier now, as though it is listening. The microbes continue their patient work, unaware of prophecy, indifferent to consequence. Their persistence hums in the air, in the sea, in the stone. They are shaping eternity without knowing. And in that vision, I see us too, unaware, unintentional, shaping futures through silence we cannot control. The Archean leaves me with a humbling truth. Eternity is never ours to command. It unfolds not from what we intend, but from what persists. And what persists may not be our glory, but our residue. Our silence, carried forward, will write futures we cannot imagine. I breathe deeply as this realization settles into me. The Archean is not only a story of origins, but a mirror held up to our own age. It shows us that silence is not emptiness, but transformation. It is the true author of history, the quiet force that prepares every beginning. And so I return to the present with a question that feels older than stone itself. If silence is prophecy, then what prophecy are we writing now in every breath, in every scar, in every trace we leave behind? The question coils around me like smoke, impossible to escape, demanding an answer I cannot give. I think of the Archean again, of its oceans rusting red, of its storms cracking the sky with light. Its prophecy was not deliberate. It was written in silence, in persistence, in the unnoticed exhalations of microbes that neither knew nor cared what they shaped. Yet their silence carried us into being. Their prophecy became our present, and now here we are, the inheritors of that silence, writing prophecies of our own. Every action we take, every consequence we leave, is ink upon the same page. We imagine permanence in our monuments, our stories, our songs. But the Archean whispers that permanence lies elsewhere. It lies in the traces we cannot erase, in the scars that linger, in the transformations too vast to reverse. These are the verses silence will carry forward. And just as the microbes could not imagine us, we cannot imagine what might grow from what we leave. I return in thought to the cliffs of banded iron, their layers stacked like pages of a book written by extinction. They hold no voices, no stories, only chemistry. Yet from their silence rises the greatest story of all. The story of transformation, of survival, of prophecy unfolding. They remind me that silence does not record meaning. It records consequence, and consequence becomes destiny for those who come after. The Archean leaves me with an unease that feels almost unbearable. If silence is prophecy, then what prophecy are we leaving behind? Will our silence prepare a world of breath and renewal, as theirs did? Or will it bloom into ruin too deep to heal? Will we be remembered, even in absence, as foundations for futures, or only as scars carved into stone? The answer is not ours to choose. It belongs to silence, and silence alone. On that volcanic shore in my mind, the storm has quieted. The seas still glow with rust, the sky still flickers with fire, but the silence feels heavier, more enduring. The microbes persist, indifferent, patient, eternal in their consequence. Their silence is prophecy, and so, perhaps, is ours. And as I let this realization settle, I find myself left with questions that will not let go. If silence decides what endures, then what of us will it carry? Will we be remembered as creators or as the erased? Could our silence one day prepare futures we cannot imagine, just as theirs prepared us? Or will our silence be a harvest of ruin, a prophecy fulfilled not in life, but in desolation? Share your thoughts below. And if you're new here, subscribe to Planet Echoes so you don't miss the next journey into the hidden silences of our world.